Welcome to Cyber Ahead with AI, the podcast where we explore how AI is transforming cybersecurity from strategy to execution and what's really working for today's leaders. I'm your host, Parth Shah. Each episode, I sit down with founders, CISOs, and innovators who are pushing the boundaries of security and technology. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Stan Golubchik, CEO and co-founder of ContraForce. Stan has had an incredible journey. He immigrated from the Soviet Union, built his career through Intel, McAfee, and Armor, and then took the leap of starting ContraForce in 2021. Since then, ContraForce has gone through Y Combinator, been named Microsoft Security ISV of the Year, and most recently joined the prestigious Microsoft Pegasus Program, all while building what Stan calls the Kubernetes for security services. Stan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Parth, it's great to be here and honor, and I'm really excited for the conversation.
Awesome. Well, we're very, very lucky to have you here. Where are you dialing in from today?
I'm in Dallas.
Dallas? Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time. I wanted to really start up with your story. Can you share a little bit about your journey from growing up in Dallas to Intel, McAfee, Armor, and then taking the leap to start ContraForce?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really started in a family that actually was really around the IT space. Mom was a programmer. Dad was selling hardware before the dot-com boom. So at an early age, 7, I was building computers. By the time I was 11, I was able to actually start coding. My mom put a Unix system in front of me from her enterprise company that she was working with. And I just got really a strong affinity and a passion for IT. I eventually actually went into the corporate space in IT as a network engineer. That was a big corporation called Essilor. I did that for a few years. I really got my feet underneath me from that perspective and then joined Intel. Spent some time into Intel as a consultant. Then I got spun out to McAfee. And then I got to also do a lot of great work doing technical marketing engineering, building advanced threat detection tools with product and engineering, hosting a lab, creating advanced malware detection tools. And that was a fantastic journey. Before I left McAfee, I actually got to start working with hyperscalers, specifically AWS, quite substantially. I was actually a lead solution architect. And the great thing about that was trying to figure out how do you take these advanced technologies and move them into the cloud. So got a lot of experience doing that. And then before starting ContraForce, I was actually at an MDR provider, Armor, and really got to actually build out and take to market SOC service, right? So that gave me a great ability to kind of see the external go-to-market presence that a SOC has, but also my time in McAfee. We were building SOC for enterprise customers from an internal perspective. So really great experience from providing a commercialized professional SOC, but also providing a SOC for risk and mitigating that risk as an enterprise. So I've really been spending my time in that SecOps space for well over 10 years and been in that cyberspace for over 15 years.
That's fascinating. So you started out as a hacker when you were, what, 7, you said?
Yeah. I mean, hacker builder. Yeah. So
Look at you, it seems like you've done it all. You started with building computers to hacking your way through things to now helping protect enterprises from getting hacked. That's a fantastic story, Stan. Thanks for sharing. So what's a day in the life like for you as the CEO of a startup, almost creating a new category?
yeah, never a dull moment. Yeah, it's always fun. I mean, there's a lot of amazing opportunity that we get to be part of. We work quite a bit with Microsoft as a strategic partner. We've been really fortunate because of our relationship with Microsoft. We actually get access to some of the most advanced enterprise-ready security tools and platforms, also AI platforms. That's been an amazing opportunity to build new innovative products that, to your point, are a little first to market, and we've always been a little bit of a early entrant to market. We're now starting to see that change. But my day to day, it can be comprised of many different things: customer facing, talking to investors, helping build product, design products, working in the sales, customer success, onboarding. You wear a lot of hats, right? As a founder and a CEO. So, outside of being a CEO, I think there's a lot of different hats you have to wear every single time and be very multifaceted. So it really depends on the day, the week, and even the month. So, but I love it. I wouldn't change a thing about it.
That's amazing, Stan. And you're right about wearing a lot of hats. But as a CEO, it's cool that, you've had this journey where you were obviously technical, but I love how go-to-market focused you've been over the last few years in your life. That's fantastic. You said something about, about your partnership with Microsoft. And, in the past when we chatted, you talked about how Microsoft is one of the biggest disruptors in our industry. What do you see them doing differently than others?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it really comes down to they have data gravity and they have something that's really unique, different from other security vendors in the space, which is they own the infrastructure layer. And I think from owning that infrastructure layer, it puts them in a position to be able to have that data gravity. In other words, the ability to be able to create strong, scalable security tools and maintain the actual underlying data fabric and infrastructure that hosts all that. This, I think, gives them an unfair advantage to be able to build products in a unique way, but also at a way that can fully scale. And then what I also saw, from my early days in McAfee, to give you kind of an example here, was that when Microsoft decides to go into security, they tend to really take out all the air from the room. And a lot of that's due to the fact that they have the scale, they have the resources, and they're putting a lot of investment in the R&D side behind their products and their platform. And when they do so, it's very difficult to compete against that kind of platform. And so, when we started the business, we saw them as a very strategic partner to be able to actually build off of that premise I just mentioned, but gives us the ability to also understand that we're working with a best of breed security technology provider that has a comprehensive ecosystem. But more importantly, we saw that there's a really strong partner ecosystem. And, you already mentioned this to some degree, but we do work with service providers, MSSPs, MSPs. And Microsoft has one of the largest channels globally. And so we saw that as a great opportunity to build products in the supply chain that Microsoft supports, but also drive the distribution scale that Microsoft can utilize and we can utilize to be able to actually drive the business and grow from that perspective.
Very insightful. So really, because of the sheer amount of resources and the fact that they own the infrastructure and also have this very rich ecosystem of partners that's made them a very, very good fit. I know you touched on MSSPs and MDRs. What shifts are you seeing in, I guess, how these service providers deliver security today?
Yeah, we still see a lot of traditional service delivery. So there's still things that haven't changed, and that typically happens in the cyberspace. But there are different things that are happening and that are changing fundamentally. MSSPs, MDR providers, it's a game of efficiency. It's a business of efficiency and scale. And one of the most important things for them as a business is twofold. Number one, how can I always provide better outcomes to my customer? That's either through a better SLA or more standardized service level objectives so I can support more customers at scale without actually diluting my service quality. And the second piece is margin. And margin is extremely important. And as you know, right, protecting my gross margin, my net margin as a provider is everything to me, right? Not only from a profitability perspective, but by protecting my margin, I get strong multiples as a business, but I also can be able to take more cash flow and bring that in to actually invest into more innovative technologies and capabilities that help advance the security service delivery practice of that business. So what we've been really seeing is more providers that are really security centric are now investing heavily in more automation, heavily in AI. And what we've seen is that the past 12 months has really been let's wait and see what the market's going to do. And that's really because of the exponential rate of progression we're seeing with AI. If I invest into something that right now looks good on paper, 6 months, it could become irrelevant and obsolete, right? So, service providers like to take that 3 to 5 year bet on technology. And so they're really looking at that right bet to put in the right place, making sure that they have the future proof technology and solution that's going to help drive profitability, better margin, and outcomes for their customers.
That's a very well said. With a lot of MDRs and MSSPs, oftentimes in today's competitive environment, they might even be operating on a negative margin business. As we all know, AI is changing the game, and you just talked about it. So, how do you see AI and automation reshaping SOC as a whole?
Yeah, first of all, we always take the approach to make sure that when we talk with any professional SOC that's building services and delivering that value to the customer, it's all about helping the people they have today. It's not replacing the people. It's about empowering the people. And I think that's very important. You may have heard of this terminology that's been floating around, which is the lights off SOC, right? And that might happen. I don't think it's going to be happening in the next 2, 3 years. But I always think there's going to be a critical element of having human in the loop. And that human capacity is very important, not only from a customer success or relationship perspective, but the context only a human can bring, which AI can't in today's world. So I think that's really important. And then secondly, I think AI is really valuable because when a SOC correctly augments AI in the human workflow, it can really become a force multiplier. We talked to a lot of MSSPs, anywhere from 10 to up to 50 people in the SOC. And what they always want to do is understand, how can I invest in AI to not only help my current people in my SOC do more work more efficiently, but start to actually up level them to do more advanced skills and tasks.
Hmm.
So it's really not a let's offset our labor. It's let's automate a lot of this redundant labor. So our humans that are very contextually aware and have a lot of critical thinking ability can go apply themselves in different areas where before they were very bogged down by the minutia of the day-to-day operational tasks that are necessary to keep a stock working in an effective way.
Interesting. So it's almost as if you're taking arduous operational tasks and helping the humans become more strategic in this workflow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about ContraForce. Clearly, this is the space that you're playing at. So tell us a little bit about ContraForce. Why now, and where are you headed?
Yeah. So let me start from the genesis, right? So when me and my co-founder CTO, we started it, we were working at an MDR provider. And again, previously we worked at building internal SOCs and SOCs for other providers, right? So we saw both sides of the coin. One thing that became very evident is that one single SOC does not scale. And there's a lot of reasons that happens. But there's another element, which is a SOC, and implementing a SOC service requires a lot of professional services. So when we started the business, we said, how can we automate a lot of these professional services that actually drive the SOC and the workflow and the ability to deliver effective services? So we kind of had that idea to start with, and we wanted to focus more on security engineering. How can we automate that?
Mm.
Right? So we wanted to create that automation around the security engineering side. And that's really what we started doing, first of all. Since then, we've obviously evolved. We've now built a multi agent, multi tenant system that provides an orchestration layer for a provider to orchestrate AI agents across all their tenants. This is extremely valuable because every agent is necessary. It's necessary for every agent to be context aware, right? So if I deploy one AI agent to a customer workspace, the context in that workspace and that customer tenant is going to be very different from my other customer because different assets, different risk profile. So we had to make sure that we can provide this context aware intelligence per agent and then aggregate the control in one single plane. And so that's really where we have a ton of value and where we're driving towards, because we see that's the way of being able to provide scalable security services for our provider partners.
Fascinating. Fascinating. What started out as a way to automate some security engineering asks has turned into almost a network of agents that work together for SOC operations with
Yeah.
context.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an essence of what we can do. And, you can control within ContraForce the detection layer. Detection layer is important because the agent uses that as a context point to ground itself. But there's many other things in there as well that the agent can utilize. And the beautiful thing about what we've built is that the provider that we work with, or providers, they don't have to worry about the engineering overhead. Like, the question always comes on, hey, if we bring on ContraForce, what's the engineering resource requirement? And so everything we do is very API friendly, highly automated from the deployment process. And that brings a lot of value to our MSSPs because they can actually get time to value quickly, but also really save time and money on the resources that are typically allocated to deploy and implement a customer with a security service offering.
That, I would love for you to, if it's okay with you, to double click on that point for the audience. If you could just expand on what was the reality of, like, what would it entail to go out and think about the resource, get the resource, and get something going versus the new future that you are driving towards.
Yeah, I mean, worst case scenario in my tenure, we've seen deployments and onboarding take as long as 6 months, and this can be deployment of infrastructure, deployment and tuning of rules. That's kind of the worst case scenario. And of course, the more complex the customer environment, the longer that will take. But on average, I think 4 weeks is typically what we see to deploy a customer environment. But then there's an ongoing maintenance cost that's associated, right? So you have a backlog. That backlog is tuning, creation, it's maintenance, right? And also making sure that your analysts are operating under the right SLAs. So with what we have now, MSSP can do their initial onboarding, let's say with 5 customers also, and that can be done within 60 minutes. So all that intent, all that service delivery configuration is built into the platform, and then you can customize that per customer tenant. And that gives the ability for the agent, when deployed on top of that configuration, to start to actually process security alerts events into incidents in an effective way based on the service protocol within that customer tenant. And so that gives that kind of granularity, but without all that deployment overhead that traditionally has been in the space.
Wow. So a lot of bang for your buck, huh?
That's right.
Love it. So what's been working well for you in ContraForce? What are you most proud of?
Yeah. So, I think what's working really well is that, we've identified, I would say, a very interesting niche in the market, right? Which is these MSSPs, and specifically around security delivery. And, you know, that's really important because I want to delineate that versus automation or orchestration. An MSSP, how it delivers security is very different how an enterprise SOC delivers security. And so for us, we wanted to make sure that we can clearly define that differentiation, because when you go talk to an MSSP, it's a different language, it's a different conversation. They want to drive a business conversation, how they can uplift their business outcomes, right? When you go to an enterprise, they want to understand, if I'm a CISO as an example, how can I manage my governance and my risk, right?
Mhm.
Savings is part of the conversation. I'm even more happy. So honestly, we've been really proud on being able to really get close and understand these pain points that these MSSPs have. And it's taken some time, because one thing that we have seen as one of the biggest challenges is when you approach an MSSP, they're a little bit close guarded, right? They kind of keep things to their chest because, hey, this thing is my IP. I'm not going to tell you how I do A, B, and C. So we had to really build trust and establish that. So when we go to the MSS, they understand that we're there to help them actually enable and grow their business and nothing else. And I think we've done a phenomenal job in kind of building that trust and the way to have that conversation in an effective way.
That's amazing. And how have you navigated the market, right? You've obviously been reaching out to different MSSPs, but there's so much AI noise in the market. I know we talked about this in the past. How have you been navigating the market today? And like from your perspective, how has that changed with AI in the game?
Yeah. I'm going to lean back to that Microsoft relationship because I do think that's important, especially from the go to market perspective. And you had mentioned Pegasus. The reason that's critical is because we were actually one of the first startups and security vendors, or vendors, period, that actually were building with Microsoft around their new AI services. And why that's really important is because when Microsoft saw that we were building architecture that was scalable, and as I like to call it, useful AI, it gives the ability to help them actually trust that we have something that's aligned with the best practice architecture, which can also help us differentiate. That alone is actually getting Microsoft to say, "Go work with ContraForce. We recommend them because they're not only providing value to you as an MSSP, but they're doing it in a way that's actually architected so you can get the value out of it for the years to come." So that's been immensely valuable for us. It's also helped us kind of get above that noise, to your point, because it is very noisy right now. And then, what's really nice is that we can now get into a pilot, a POV, and really show that value because, again, we have useful AI that's been architected in a way to be able to deliver that value for an MSSP in their workflow. So it's been a challenge. And, I think it's part of the journey as an entrepreneur and as a startup. But I think that relationship and the way we've actually approached product development, engineering has helped us really get above that as well.
That's fascinating. You said so many great things in there that I'd love to unpack. First and foremost, just for our listeners, what is this coveted Pegasus program?
Yeah. So Pegasus is program for the Microsoft startup community. Some numbers here. Microsoft obviously has massive global scale. They currently support over 150,000 startups in their Microsoft for Startups program. Out of those 150,000, there are less than 150 globally that are in the Pegasus program. So we were actually hand selected to be able to join the Pegasus program because of our unique product proposition and our USP, which was really about that MSSP optimization, efficiency gain, and so forth. So we had our executive sponsor reach out to us and say, hey, we love what you guys are doing. We see the value. We don't have anybody that's actually facing this challenge head on, and we'd love to bring you on. And so we joined earlier this year, and it's honestly been fantastic. We now have more support with the go-to-market team. We're very closely aligned, even more so with the product team. And working on really cool initiatives, which actually we're going to start announcing over the next few weeks. So really excited about that. But it puts us in a great position to really identify areas where Microsoft doesn't have the capacity to service or actually address. And that's where they bring in these Microsoft Pegasus startups to be able to help address those gaps in a sense.
Awesome. So you were hand selected, 150 out of 150,000, you said? That's one hell of a stat. And, so a top 1% solution. And I know you said Kubernetes for security services. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, and I like to use that very loosely, and I'm really glad you're
Okay.
that because it can be a little abstract. But what we saw is an opportunity for the MSSPs to be able to harness their own AI infrastructure, right? And that analogy there with Kubernetes is that you look at a K8 cluster and it helps you be able to provide clusters of resource groups, right? But without having to worry about all those microservice configurations and being able to actually focus also all on that underlying network and configuration state. So the platform we have, it kind of functions in a very similar way. When you deploy ContraForce, you don't have to worry about spinning up your own agent factory. And then being able to actually have an agent factory that can deploy nested AI agents per customer tenant is no longer necessary. We're fully abstracting that deployment configuration process and workflow. So when the MSSP deploys, they stand up their own agent center, takes about 15 minutes. And then with one click, they can go deploy an AI agent per customer workspace. Makes it very seamless. It makes it very streamlined. And immediately you have a deployable agent that's doing a lot of that SecOps workflow tasks on the behalf of your humans. And so, not very, cluster specific on resources in the cloud, but it's kind of cluster specific on a AI agent tenant basis that's specific to that customer service intent and the SLOs and SLAs that they have in place.
That's fascinating. The last thing I wanted to unpack in what you had said was you do POVs. You just said 15 minutes. That is unheard of in the MDR and MSSP world. That, like, forget even doing a 2-month POV. You said 15.
Yeah, we can onboard. We can get you on board in about 15 minutes. Currently, the first deployment process with the agent factory, it's 15 to 30 minutes. But then deploying a customer with the right permissions, you can get it done in about 10 to 15 minutes per customer. So it's a very standardized and a repeatable onboarding process. And this is also with deploying detection rules, content, deploying automation, context, configuring service level intent. So all that can be done within that time frame. So, we definitely take a lot of pride in that ability to make that happen really quickly.
That's amazing. Honestly, it sounds like you and the team are really onto something there.
Yeah, we think so.
Well, so. I know you mentioned earlier that, you're always either talking to customers, VCs, you're wearing a lot of different hats. And so, what are some of the key milestones that you're focused on?
Yeah, so, this year really has been pivot from R&D product focused development, and now we're really going to market. And so for us, it's really how do we elevate the profile for the business? How do we also scale distribution? And some of those things are going to be coming out in the next few weeks. But for us, it's all about distribution scale. And I think that's one of our biggest milestones. We've taken a lot of time, we put a lot of intent also, and have been thoughtful on how we package and commercialize the products. We have very strong technology at the core of the business, but making sure that we can actually put it in a way into the market that's palatable from a commercial perspective has been actually one of the biggest challenges. And I think part of that was because if you go sell to an MSSP, every cost that they have to actually add to their bottom line to deliver service erodes their margin.
Hmm.
You have to be very sensitive on how you commercialize your product for that reason, right? So some of the milestones we have now after sorting out and figuring out that puzzle is now just scaling out the business. Right now, we're also ramping up for our next financial round from a Series A perspective. So we're excited. We're heads down, building and shipping, and looking to distribute as quickly as possible and get out there, excuse me, in the global market.
Interesting. And so, could you unpack the, I guess, go to market challenge that you see as you're talking to MSSPs? I know you touched on the margin bit. And I guess, is that, from your perspective, an industry wide problem when working with just any MSSP and any MDR out there?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, there's going to be some edge cases, but I think that's a problem for any MSSP. Um, they're going to be extremely sensitive for every new line item that they bring on to their business, right? To deliver that service. So, um, I think that was a challenge. Honestly, we struggled with that for the first, 2 years or so. And, we put some numbers out there initially that we definitely didn't hear feedback from, which was a sign that that's way too expensive. But then there's other sides of that where we found that there's different ways to actually commercialize the product and charge on a different unit basis. And so we kind of created this whole workspace model. Workspace is a tenant, and that's really how we can simplify the actual pricing model. And we have some other unique things that we're going to be rolling out in the next few months around how we can actually commercialize the product. So I think we're in a really strong state in terms of how to commercialize it effectively. But the problem was always finding that right price point that was palatable for the MSSP when they can look at that and say, that's a good point from a price perspective. But now let me go test that from a POV perspective. And then if I see X amount of return on investment, it's a no brainer, right? And the thing about an MSSP is that if you can, get that initial contract with them, the likelihood for you to stay with them over the next few years is very high, right? Because it's a very sticky solution, but also MSSPs do not like to rip and replace things that are core to their service delivery in their stack because it's painful and it's very resource intensive. So, these are things that we're always conscious of and we try to apply to the way we package and commercialize it because it will impact the bottom line to our customers. And we want to make sure that it's beneficial and they're getting optimal results and optimal value.
Amazing. And oftentimes I think people scoff when they see a price, but it sounds like what you're doing, there's a big cost savings aspect as well. I know we talked about this. A lot of how we measure services was always this unit of man hours or people hours. And now with AI, that first word is starting to drop, right? So how are you doing, like creating and striking that balance as you're working with your customers and prospects?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think we kind of talked about this as well previously. AI, I think one of the most potent things about AI is actually offsetting labor. That's really what it does, right? A unit of work that AI can do can it offset this traditional human labor cost. And, we've seen different prices ranging from on the maybe lower end, $15 to $20 per incident managed up to maybe 3 to 4x that, right? And so when you look at AI and the computational compression it can do on the same kind of task of work, you could get a 10, 15, 20x return on the cost reduction. That labor cost, I think as we start going down that security operations life cycle, each one of those steps you can start to look at how do I offset that with labor that's now driven by AI, right? It now becomes a computational requirement and a computational cost. That's pretty easy to predict. And as we get more data around this, I think it's going to be even better to predict. And I really think that's going to be that metered usage that SOCs and service providers are going to start to look at and start to say, instead of paying this much for my new hire, I can now figure out that AI with my current human can be able to take on 10x more work, but at a tax reduction of cost.
Very interesting. I love how, while you're impacting the margins by one, driving crazy productivity, two, driving costs down. I love that at the heart of your message is still, hey, like we're in a sense upskilling and up leveling the humans to be more strategic so that they're not doing a lot of operational tasks. Awesome. So where would you like, ContraForce to be 6 to 12 months from?
Yeah. So, I think for us, we have some ambitious goals. We want to get into thousands of service providers. There's different ways we want to approach that, but ultimately we see a big opportunity to be able to go to the global service provider market and really help support them to be able to do security services in an efficient way, right? Our mission is really about providing effective security services and making it accessible for everyone. And I think that's been pretty difficult. And I think there's different levels of that, right? But there's one thing that we all know, which is we don't have enough security services today globally, right? Because if you look at from a cybercrime perspective, if we had enough effective security services, cybercrime should be going down, but it keeps compounding up, right? So what we're doing today from a status quo perspective needs to change. And I think it's going to be a volume game, right? It's going to allow us to be able to say, how can ContraForce enable more of these providers to service customers from small, micro, SMB up to enterprise, right? And there's going to be a service provider that has an appetite for each one of those customer segments. And we really want to get to that point in 12 months of supporting, north of 1,000 of those providers across the globe.
That's amazing. That's an awesome mission, by the way. And currently, are you just in North America or United States, and then you plan to go international soon?
We kind of went a little backwards. So we are actually already international.
Wow.
Still kind of early, but we are able to distribute and service. We have partners, service providers in Australia, New Zealand. We have them in the UK, and we have them in Canada, LATAM, US, and we're also now talking with some that are over in the APAC regions. Yeah, we're already kind of a global international company, even though we're still kind of small and lean, but we've set the foundation, ready to grow from that perspective.
That is amazing. Amazing stuff. And so if you had one wand and you could solve one challenge today, well,
Great question. I would say it would probably be the budget for providers to put aside for AI compute. I think that's the one thing that right now could be massively advantageous. And what I mean by that is today, as we talk to a lot of providers, there's always some directive, either coming from the C level or the board, that's saying AI needs to be on your roadmap, right? And if we're doing something around security, let's go do that. And I think there needs to be a little bit more allocation and understanding of what that cost is going to be. And I think we're at a really great time because if you look at AI and kind of that race to the bottom from an economic perspective, it just keeps getting more and more efficient, right? And, there's obviously massive infrastructure build out on the AI side. So I think if there was a better way to be able to provide budgetary allocation and projections for these companies to be able to understand what it would look like to be able to actually deliver AI across their security stack and then their services, I think that'd be a really easier way. But at the end of the day, nothing's easy. We are actually addressing that head on right now in some different ways. Um, my wand would definitely like to solve that problem if it could.
I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely love that. So let me ask you this, right? You're a lean team. You're already international, few years into your journey, which is amazing. How are you reaching these partners? And two, how are you educating them on this whole notion of rethinking the budget and AI compute?
Yeah. So, the reach for us is going through the channel, right? We've been a very channel centric business, part of which, I had a lot of experience doing so in McAfee, and that was a great advantage. Building the right partnerships with channel and alliances has been critical for us to be able to get that scale and reach these providers, right? This is either through the hyperscaler, such as Microsoft, or through distribution partners. And so that's really helped us be able to get that scale. And the education piece, you're spot on. That's always going to be a challenge, right? With anyone, with any business, I'm so surprised there's still a massive gap to be filled from an educational perspective. But the way we support it is kind of twofold, is we try to simplify it through a better UX and UI. And I think that's really important because today, as you know, being able to manage a multitude of security tools across the stack and then build a service around it, it's not for the faint of heart. And it takes a lot of very skilled and very intelligent people, right? And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of those people specifically in the cyberspace, right? It takes years and years of cultivating that aptitude. So we had to build a lot of that kind of knowledge-based work and workflows within the platform to kind of compress that education gap. But secondly, I think what's been really helpful is that there are other providers out there, security providers, security vendors, and they're all honestly doing a good job on educating why security is important. And so there's a lot more educational content out there, through social media, YouTube, whatever that may be. So when we go to a provider that's starting a new practice, what we are seeing is that they are very hungry to do so, but they're able to actually come in there with at least some baseline of aptitude around what it means to deliver security services and cybersecurity essential. So that's always been helpful for us. And the enablement piece also helps with distribution partners that we work with. So, there's a multitude of aspects of what's really kind of helping raise the tide, as I like to call it, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Indeed. It sounds like you guys, really have it figured out from hyperscalers down to how you're thinking about distribution globally. How are you getting across the mental block that a lot of service providers have that, hey, we haven't used AI in forever, and now we have to build something in-house to innovate versus being like, hey, look, like there is a service that you can layer on top of what you've already done and start to be productive on day one. I'm sure that's a tough part to educate your audience on. And so how do you get over that?
Yeah, that's always been kind of the I would say a pretty substantial friction point depending on who we talk to. It's the, old saying of I'm gonna either build, I'm gonna buy, or I'm gonna partner. And yeah, we see definitely providers that say, I'm gonna build. And quite frankly, coming from an MDR provider where we try to build and we try to deliver, one thing stays very true is you're never going to do both very, very well. So there's always a trade-off, right? And, in fact, if you're doing services and you're trying to build IP and technology, you're not helping your people, right? You already have analysts, you have security engineers, you have security architects, and they already have so much to deal with, right? And they're not taking, non-complex tasks and projects. So they're already overburdened. They're doing a lot. And then you go say, hey, I need you to go write code. I need you to handle DevOps. I need you to help maintain my backlog. We could get dedicated engineers, but there's always some disconnect. And quite frankly, what we've seen from providers that try to do this at scale is you create a lot of unhappy employees, right? And you want to be able to drive the ability to retain your people that are really good and get away from attrition, right? We always have that conversation and say, look, you can build, and some do go that path, but it's painful, right? And you're not helping anybody from an employee perspective. So if you really care about your employees, you want to invest into the human element of your business, drive a healthy culture, and really drive scale. I think it's a hard decision, but it's one that by the end of the day, if you start to partner, you really see the compounding return on that investment in a good way.
It's an awesome point. You're right. So just from your perspective, what is the most exciting opportunity ahead for ContraForce?
Yeah, I honestly think it's the way we can fundamentally change how AI is utilized for security services. So I think for us, we have a very unique place in the market. And I think it's also challenging a legacy market that really has been doing the same thing over and over again. And I think that impact is really going to be substantial because of what we've built and the way we're positioned. But I think also then on the other side of that is that it will have disproportionate returns on the value that it can provide, right? Because at this point in time, it's really about how we can enable these providers to get their hands on useful operational AI and put it in their workflow. And I think that's going to be something that we're really excited to see how it unfolds over the next few years because I think fundamentally the security service market and the security service landscape is going to really change, right? And that's not just how AI is going to drive productivity, like you mentioned earlier, but it's also how do humans start to actually work with these systems, right? And I think that's going to change the way we think, the way we get up and do day-to-day tasks. So I think that usage is going to be really interesting, and I think we're going to have a really substantial impact on that side.
That's amazing. You're right. I mean, we don't think too much about the interplay between the human and the AI, but they are coming together faster than we know it and probably faster than we like to.
Yeah. Really spot on. Yeah, I agree with that.
Awesome. Well, Stan, this has been absolutely fantastic. From your journey from Intel, McAfee, ContraForce, the disruption that you're driving, not only in security, but even within the Microsoft ecosystem and your vision of services towards really this unit of work economics. I really think that you have a very, very unique perspective, and I'm rooting for ContraForce. I have no doubt you guys are going to kill it. So if any of the listeners want to reach out to, how can they do so?
Yeah, absolutely. You can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you want to check out our website, maybe get a demo of the product, you can go to contraforce.com. We'd love to be able to talk with you and support your journey wherever you are within that journey itself. So, yeah, let us know. Reach out anytime. We're always here to support you.
Awesome. Thank you, Stan. Well, thanks again for tuning into Cyber Ahead with AI. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a review, share it with your network. And if you have any questions for Stan, reach out to him. Thank you.